Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday Reflections. Just checking a couple of my settings here, making sure everything's groovy on my end. Looks all right. I got a new computer from work, and that's what I'm coming to you through. So everything looks and sounds and feels a little different to me. I hope it's okay on your end. I think it's a better camera, so maybe I'm a little sharper now. Anyway, hello and welcome to Friday Reflections here at San Diego Oasis. My name is Peter Bolland. I am wearing my LA Dodgers hat. Sorry if it's backwards. I'm mirroring the image. Yeah, I grew up in Ventura, California. I grew up listening to Vin Scully on the radio, and you know, back in the days of Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. And I wasn't a big sports guy as a kid, but Dodger radio was just part of my ubiquitous childhood atmosphere. So I got to root for the Dodgers in this crazy series they're having right now with the Atlanta Braves. If you follow baseball, if you don't, never mind, move on. So I got to pull out. I know it's heretical in San Diego to wear one of these because I am, of course, a Padres fan. We've lived in San Diego for over 30 years. Of course I am. But in the postseason, all loyalties are off. How are you? How are you doing these days? You know, I woke up anxious and blue today, and I kind of grouchy, as we used to call it. And I kind of walked around in that mood, and it made me reflect a little bit. You know, I think I'm like that a lot. And I know as a kid, even I was like that a lot. Now we have fancy words today like depression and anxiety. But in the old days, we just called it out of sorts and a cloud over your dark cloud over your head and stuff like that. You know, nothing felt right. Nothing seemed right. I migrated from one computer to an old computer. And now I can't find any of my files. I mean, they're literally all empty. So I'm going to go down to IT at Southwestern today and try to restore them because I don't want to. Anyway, I won't take you through my problems, but you got problems, I got problems, and they get a little overwhelming sometimes. And also, Lori and I have been doing a lot of end-of-life planning, you know, exploring cremation options and niches or niches, depends on the place. Some places call them niches, other places call them niches. And then there's, you know, we want to scatter some of our ashes, and, you know, and I've mentioned that in the last few weeks, and I don't have a problem with that. You know, intellectually, I accept death and all of that stuff, but it weighs on you. Start hanging around cemeteries and mausoleums and stuff, and looking at urns, and it kind of starts to occur to you that this is mildly depressing. And I can see why some people never want to talk about it. My dear old mother-in-law, Flo, my wife Lori's mom, she was of the opinion that I will never talk about any of that stuff. Whenever we tried to broach the topic with her, she'd say, nope, not talking about that. So it's just like, I'm going to die and y'all deal with it. But Lori and I don't have kids. And so we want to like take care of each other, and by just making the arrangements now. So anyway, this program is not about end of life planning, but those are the things that are moving through my mind. And and we talk here a lot about our spiritual lives and our philosophical lives. And I just keep thinking about this, that in the deepest spiritual practice, in the deepest spiritual experience, however you define that, all of the boundaries collapse from neglect. Do you know what I mean? All of the boundaries collapse from neglect. We stop thinking in terms of me and mine, and we start thinking in terms of the oneness. And so the boundaries between me and you, between the races, between the ethnicities, between the nationalities, the temporal boundaries, everything, all the conceptual boundaries between the divided up world, the multiplicitous world, all of those boundaries become diaphanous or porous, or they just outright collapse. Again, because we no longer pay such close attention to them. They collapse from neglect. So we enter into oneness occasionally, not because we're, must experience oneness. It's not because we're forcing our way into it. It's because we just stop paying attention to divisiveness, to the divisions that keep us apart. We stop investing time and energy into the maintenance of those boundaries. And our intention then, our attention, what we pay attention to, our authentic presence makes the most ordinary thing shimmer with significance, shimmer with reverence. And again, in this season of St. Thomas, we've been thinking about St. Francis, wrong guy. In this season of St. Francis, since in the traditional Christian liturgy, for what that's worth, the feast of St. Francis was a couple of weeks ago. We've been touching that touchstone for a few weeks here. And I thought I'd mention it just one more time. And the Franciscan order, and our favorite Franciscan around here, Richard Rohr, I bet a lot of you have Googled him by now and signed up on his newsletter, Center for Action and Contemplation, and get his newsletter every morning. Richard Rohr, in that Franciscan spirit, has been teaching us about incarnational spirituality, and that line is really got its hook in me, the one we talked about a week or two ago, that there are no sacred or profane things. There are only sacred and desecrated things. And the way things get desecrated is by our inattention, by us falling asleep to their reverent, shimmering presence. And spiritual work is just about waking up, isn't it? It's about remembering the holy, eternal presence that we're always in, but pulled away by this worry, pulled away by that memory. We're constantly off in the thought stream somewhere, far afield, and rarely here and now. That Ram Dass line, "Be here now," the name of his book, right? So we all have heard this a million times, but it's fascinating to me how quickly we fall back asleep. And by falling back asleep, we desecrate creation. Isn't that something to pause over? That our inattention, our unconsciousness desecrates the world, and then makes possible turning all of nature into just an instrument, a commodity, a resource, capital, instead of a living, breathing, holy presence. I ran into a John Muir quote that I want to share with you. We haven't talked enough about John Muir. Have you read a little bit of him? You know who he is, the Sierra Club guy, the pioneer of the national park system. We all see an image of him with his walking stick and his long beard standing there somewhere in Yosemite. That guy, the Scottish immigrant, wild man, mystic, lover of storms, and really a proto-environmentalist, right there with Thoreau, really kind of inventing the idea that nature has value in its wild state. That's an interesting position. So I ran across this this line from John Muir's journals. He didn't publish it in any of his books, but it was published by some people after he died. Here's what Muir wrote. The sun shines not on us, but in us. The rivers flow not past, but through us. Thrilling, tingling, vibrating every fiber and cell of the substance of our bodies, making them glide and sing. The trees wave and the flowers bloom in our bodies, as well as our souls. And every bird song, wind song, and tremendous storm song of the rocks in the heart of the mountains is our song, our very own, and sings our love. Wow. Muir. Read some more Muir. It's good for you. So I am in nature every day. I know y'all walk too, and I don't get to walk through pristine Sierra meadows like Muir did, but in San Diego, it ain't bad. And I walk, as I've told you many times, Lori and I walk around Lake Murray all the time with my dog Cooper. And I wanted to report back to you on something I shared with you some time ago about how angry I get at finding trash and fishing line, especially along the shore of Lake Murray, and how I always carry a kitchen trash bag with me and I fill it up. And then my spiritual work becomes picking up that trash without letting my ego swoop in and make myself a righteous hero, saving the world from the wretched, unconscious people. And yet I notice my ego trying to do that. Aren't I a good boy? Self-aggrandizement is the enemy of the consciousness of oneness and the opposite direction of the direction I want to be going in. I'm becoming my enemy essentially. And that cognitive error needs to constantly be corrected. I'm constantly grabbing the wheel and getting back on the right direction there to pick up monofilament line and trash without making any judgments, without having an opinion about the people who thoughtlessly left it behind. That becomes my spiritual practice. And it's pretty effective because I've been noticing a change. As I've told you before, last week I shared the story of the catfish that we found. We literally found a living catfish caught on a hook 20 feet offshore in a bunch of monofilament line that was tangled in a bush. There were no fishermen around fishing for catfish. This was an accidental capture. And this poor animal had been hooked there all night. We found him at 5:30, 6 in the morning in the dark with our flashlights, and we freed him as best we could. I shared that story with you, and that's just another reason for me to be pissed off about these people who leave fishing junk around. Well, the next day after I told you that story last time, Lori and I went down to the lake as we do every morning and walked. And on this day, we saw some Canada geese. You know what I'm talking about. I used to call them Canadian geese till I was gently corrected by a birder. They're called Canada geese. These big, beautiful tan and brown geese that honk like crazy when they take off and when they land. They're beautiful. We all know what Canada geese are. They're ubiquitous. Well, there's a bunch of them that live down at Lake Murray, kind of year round. And so we were walking, and this was on a Sunday morning. So it was, the sun was up. We didn't go so crazy early. We could actually see what was going on. It was nice. It was pretty. And we saw a bunch of geese 30 feet offshore, 40 feet offshore near some reeds, and they were fighting. There was a goose argument. And then we looked closer, and one of the geese was riding low in the water. These are huge birds, right, with big long necks, magnificent. And one of them was riding low in the water, and then she, or he, I'll call her she started to fly, and then we saw it with the backlight from the sun, the monofilament line wrapped around her, tying her to some reeds that she was desperately trying to break free of. And we just stood there in horror. This is a death sentence for this bird. And we ran down to the shore, and I'm looking around like, what do we do? And I said to Lori, give me your knife. and I handed her Cooper's leash, and I was just going to swim out to it. And there's people around, so I'm not going to take my clothes off. I was just, here's my phone. I'm going in the lake. It's going to be cold. You're not supposed to swim in Lake Murray, but I'm like, I don't really care about that right now. I'm going to go out there and cut that bird free. And so I handed Lori the leash, handed her my phone, was about to jump in, and the goose gave one last surge and it broke free from those reeds. But then we could see how much monofilament line was still wrapped around that creature. And she flew a little further, and it was around her neck, was around her wings, and there was 30 feet of it trailing off the back of her. She was going to get caught on something else. Here's what happened next. She swam up to the shore and she walked right in front of us. It was almost as if she was asking us for help. I'm not concluding that's the case, but that's how it felt. She walked really close to us. And as soon as she got past us, me and Lori stomped on the line, and I grabbed it and tucked, it's hard enough to reel a catfish in with your bare hands. Having a giant Canada goose on the other end of monofilament line, I mean, I wrapped it around my fingers and it was cutting in. And right before it was about to break my skin, it snapped at the goose, and she broke free of this 30, 40 feet piece of monofilament line. Now there was just a line around her chest. She could fly, she could swim, and she took off across the lake. And so once again, I was reminded, and I guess this story reminds us all, that our unconscious acts have a tremendous impact on the lives of others. It all came back, my anger at these people. And so I have to go right back to the beginning and start all over again. The catfish incident, the Canada goose incident, stuff drives me nuts. And it's a big world. I can't run around and pick up all the monofilament line. I need your help. So start carrying trash bags and walking lake shores and picking this stuff up. It's just too much. And I'm thinking of how Krishna puts it in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is the incarnation of Lord Vishnu in the Hindu pantheon, basically the Jesus of Hinduism. If you're a Christian and you have a sense of who Jesus is, Krishna is one of the many Hindu Jesuses. So he's God, but in human form. And he's talking to Arjuna in that classic book, the Bhagavad Gita. You've seen me wave it around before. And in that, Krishna says this, again, speaking as God, he says, I look upon all creatures equally. None are less dear to me and none more dear. So with that line, Krishna shatters all hierarchy. Your own child is not more valuable than that goose or that catfish in God's eyes. That's the message, right, from Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, that nobody is better than anybody else and nobody is worse than anybody else. And that extends throughout the animal kingdom as well. Reminds me of that story Joe Biden used to tell. And when he was campaigning for president, when he was 7 years old, he went to school, Catholic school, of course, a Catholic family from Scranton, Pennsylvania. And the first day of class, the nun, was asking all the kids their names, and he stood up and he said, Joe Biden, because he stuttered when he was a kid, like I did. And the nun said, Joe Biden, and all the kids started laughing, and little 7-year-old Joe Biden ran out of that classroom and ran home to his mom and was crying. And his mom, after she got the story out of him, his mom walked little Joe back to that classroom, walked into that classroom, walked up to that nun and gave her a piece of her mind. And she told Joe, little Joe Biden, nobody is better than you. And you are not better than anybody else. And that's that spiritual equanimity that we get from what Krishna just said as well, that there is no hierarchy among humans, and there is no hierarchy among all created things in this even more expansive theology. Krishna also says things like this, that I am the seed that can be found in every creature. Wherever you find strength or beauty or spiritual power, you may be sure that these have sprung from a spark of my essence. So again, in this Vedanta perspective, the God being is saying, I am not only in all living things, I am their strengths, I am their intellect, I am their emotions, I am everything you feel, everything that you're aware of, every sensation, every concept springs from the divine. That's a really expansive spirituality that is very captivating. And I can find parallels, of course, between all of those different aspects in the different traditions of how, for St. Francis, of course, or even Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, who says, lift up a rock, I am there. Break open a stick, I am there. So in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus also identifies himself with the molecular composition of all forms. So there's no duality between the sacred and the profane, as Rohr says. There's just a duality between the sacred and the desecrated, and something becomes desecrated because we fall out of our innate awareness of its sacred reverence. That's why Buddhism boils it all down to the simple metaphor. Are you asleep or are you awake? Have you awakened? The Sanskrit word for awakened is Buddha. Buddha is the one who woke up, and we are all to awaken in that way and come into the presence of the holy, to enter the kingdom of God, to use Jesus's lexicon in the Gospels. Krishna says, they alone see truly, who see the Lord the same in every creature, who sees deathless in all who die. So there's an epistemological claim, like you only have knowledge if you see the world this way. If you see the catfish as valuable as your own child. When you have that orientation conceptually, now you are seeing correctly, Krishna says. And now more will be revealed. So as I say around here quite a lot, we do not have a proximity problem. We have a perception problem. That which you seek is all around us. It is what we are, only we don't know it. That's part of the perennial philosophy. We're going to get into that next Tuesday, of course, in a different and more analytical way. But here in Friday Reflections, where we tend to kind of feel our way through things, all of these lines, as soon as I had these experiences with the catfish and the goose and everything, I went to the Gita, because I knew the Bhagavad Gita there was a bunch of stuff in here about that, about the shimmering sacred presence within all sentient life, within all conscious beings all around us. And as we shared a week or two ago, even in inanimate objects, right? And then Krishna says this, he says, as they approach me, so I receive them. All paths lead to me. So now follow the logic, right? If everything is God or is the presence of the real, Brahman, Tao, Ein Sof, if that's what everything is, then how do you find holiness? How do you find God? How do you find truth? How do you find ultimate reality? Just love what you love. Go in any direction you want. Like Krishnamurti says, truth is a pathless land. There is not one way. Krishna says it explicitly in the Gita, that as they approach me, so I receive them. And then he adds, this is our last line from the Gita today. He adds, I am ever present to those who have realized me in every creature, seeing all life as my manifestation. They are never separated from me. So this is how we come into stillness. This is how we come into wellness, wholeness. by opening our eyes to the ever-present nature of the true and of the real. And that's what I meant at the top of the show today when I said, in the deepest spiritual life, all of the boundaries collapse from neglect. Our intention, our attention, our authentic presence makes the most ordinary things shimmer with reverence. And furthermore, all of our suffering and those dark mornings and those dark times, those bad moods, when things just are overwhelming, even those wounds are a part of the pastiche, right? They're a part of the tableau. They're a part of the parade. They're part of the opera. Life is a beautiful opera, but it hurts, as Joseph Campbell put it. So I want to close with a poem here, and as we gather together every Friday from 10 to 10:30 to celebrate our aliveness together at Friday Reflections, I found a poem. This is a poet I haven't shared here, and he's relatively new to me, but I know he's kind of a big deal. Some of you know James Broughton. James Broughton is kind of luminous counterculture figure of the San Francisco Renaissance of the early 60s, late 50s, filmmaker, poet, just wild artist guy, James Broughton. This is a poem of his called Having Come This Far. Having come this far, I have been through what my through was to be. I did what I could and couldn't. I was never sure how I would get there. I nourished an ardor for thresholds, for stepping stones, and for ladders. I discovered detour and ditch. I swam in the high tides of greed. I built sand castles to house my dreams. I survived the sunburns of love. No longer do I hunt for targets. I've climbed all the summits I need to, and I've eaten my share of lotus. Now I give praise and thanks for what could not be avoided, and for every foolhardy choice. I cherish my wounds and their cures, and the sweet enervations of bliss. My book is an open life. I wave goodbye to the absolutes and send my regards to infinity. I'd rather be blithe than correct. Until something transcendent turns up, I splash in my poetry puddle and try to keep God amused. Having come this far. By James Broughton. Thank you. Namaste. Bless you. Have a wonderful weekend. Don't forget about Tech Fair, November 4th and 5th. I'll see you at my webinar, The Perennial Philosophy, on Tuesday, and I'll see you at all future Friday Reflections. So grateful to have you here with us. Thank you. See you on the other side.